If you decide that Chapter 13 is right for you, how is your payment calculated? How do you determine how much you're supposed to pay back, or how much the bankruptcy court feels you should pay back based on your circumstances and your income? Well, it's based on predominantly that. It's based on two separate tests that look at your income and look at your living situation to determine what you should have available to pay back. Now, the two different tests, one is looking simply at your income and expenses on a monthly basis to see what's left over, looking at your ordinary income plus your monthly expenses. The second one looks at your income, but looks at what the government says your expenses are to determine what you should pay back or how much your payment should be. Previously, I spoke about how when you're looking at your qualifications for filing for bankruptcy, you have to understand what's deductible and what's not deductible. And that portion of what I was talking about really applies here, because certain expenses allow you to receive a full deduction, other expenses only a partial and sometimes no deduction at all. So you may have deductions here that the government says really aren't deductions that they're going to allow you to take. And the objective is to understand, for your attorney, for somebody knowledgeable like myself, to understand how these two interact and how they interact to equal a number that satisfies three different types of people. First of all, it satisfies you because you're able to afford it. Second of all, it satisfies the bankruptcy court because you're able to tell the bankruptcy court that this is a fair number that should be paid. And lastly, it satisfies the creditors because they know you're paying this fair number back and they will be receiving something. So what I just want to recap, the amount that you actually would be repaying to creditors isn't dependent on how much debt you have at all. It's entirely dependent on these two simple tests. And again, this one is a little bit more complicated because somebody has to understand what the nuances are here. But for your understanding, this is how you get to a number. Now, when I talked about deductible and non-deductible expenses, I'll just mention one briefly that comes to mind that people take as deductions that the government says you can't. And that's taking out private education for your children. We all want to give our children the best we can. And a lot of people have their children in Catholic schools or other private education. However, the courts have ruled that private education cannot be applied in either case. So let's say you pay $500 a month for your child to attend a private school. They pretend that that $500 a month isn't even on either of these tests when taking your living expenses and all your other expenses into consideration. Now, some expenses that are included on both tests. So that's an example of one that's not. An example of one that is a car loan. If you have a car loan that's reasonable for your situation, then not only can you take it as an expense on this side, but you can also take it as an expense on this side. And taking that car loan as an expense is permissible in determining what you have to pay back to your creditors. So understanding the nuances and subtleties of this law in this area is very important when you're thinking about going down the path of a Chapter 13 bankruptcy.